Train the muscles, not the joints.
So welcome back to Natural Gallant Bodybuilding, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about some factors that go into building strength. Now, this isn't really a how to build strength type of video, but what I want to talk about is just some of the things to consider when you're trying to build strength, and there is more than one weak link in building it, okay? So a lot of times you'll see me train in the gym, and there are lots of times I could put way more weight on the bar and lift. Like say I want to do squats for my range of motion, but the weak link in my body is the joints or the ligament tissue, or maybe I feel like my lower back can't take that sort of strain, so I want to make sure I don't push it and possibly deviate from my form and injure myself or something. So we could call this a structural weak link when it comes down to strength. Right? So say your structure, like your ligaments, tendons, and joints just cannot take the weight, or you feel that it may be a risk or a detriment to you, maybe it'll cause an injury, then this would be called a structural limitation when it comes down to building strength. On that note, there was somebody I was talking to in the gym yesterday, and this person's newly educated, they've just got their certifications. He said to me, he said, Jason, for your torn rotator cuff labrum, you know, the dislocating shoulder I have from hockey, I actually have a torn rotator, like the actual labrum itself is torn. And she goes, why don't you just do some rotator cuff exercises? Because that'll fix everything, right? But the thing is with rotator cuff exercises, it can help. Don't get me wrong, it can help when it comes down to bench pressing or any sort of my upper body pressing type movements. It can help, but you cannot replace a structure just by strengthening up some of the muscle, although the muscle can mimic structure to a certain point, but it will never be the same as the structure there being in place. Now, the reason why is because if I have one shoulder sitting slightly different than the other and I'm bench pressing a bit sideways on the bench, that's gonna be totally different than me having a totally balanced and linear way of pushing the weight so that there's supreme balance, right? So if this imbalance is caused from a structural deviation, aside from doing surgery, there's really nothing you can do around it except for make sure you make allowances in your training around that. So that would be another example of structural limitation when it comes down to strength. So I've noticed this with myself. Sometimes I will push, but I'll hold a little bit back in the gas tank to make sure that I don't push too hard. Because if I push too hard, I may push imbalanced, and when you're imbalanced and you push too hard, that's when injuries can happen. That's when things can pull and all that sort of thing. So this is why I'm a little bit more conservative sometimes when I push, because I have a few structural limitations based on some of the sports I was playing outside of bodybuilding and got some injuries from that. So this is the structural limitation that we could talk about with strength. Now the other limitation, and this is the one that drives me nuts, because a lot of people out there, they're trying to do their 1 rep max, their PR, and then they're walking around with a puffed up chest because they did a good PR, right? And it's great to accomplish something. It's great to be able to push a little bit more weight. In my experience, I'd say a 1 rep max in a lot of cases is a real good measure of coordination on top of structural integrity, as well as strength of the actual muscle tissue. So basically my point is, coordination and strength are not the same thing. But coordination plays a large role in how much weight you can lift when it comes to a given exercise, such as bench press, squat, deadlift. When your strength is specialized in one movement, coordination plays a massive role. So it's something to bear in mind. Sometimes your strength will not necessarily be so good some days, but sometimes you have a coordination thing that's going on. Sometimes your coordination is off. It's not necessarily like you've lost contractile ability in the muscle itself. So it's one factor to bear in mind. Another thing is, if somebody else just does flat bench all the time with barbell bench, and they're doing that all the time, and then you're doing a variety of different exercises such as flies and presses and different machine type presses, and then you're doing bench press from time to time, and then you're doing dumbbell presses, you may find, not always, but you may find that your bench press might not be as good as this other person that is specialized in refining their coordination in this movement. So this is the thing. So it doesn't mean that you're actually weaker. It just means that you haven't specialized in the coordination aspect of your workout when it comes down to that one particular exercise. You're trying to build, as a bodybuilder, all these different muscle groups, which is why a lot of times bodybuilders don't have the same type of bench press as the powerlifter in the same weight category and so forth. So I guess what I'm trying to say to you is, don't measure yourself based on an expectation that is not necessarily reasonable, because you're not taking in all the factors of what a 1 rep max entails. Right? And a large part of 1 rep max is not only can your tissue take it, can you not hurt yourself based on lifting that overwhelming amount of load on your joints, right? So can your joints take it? but it's also about have you refined the coordination. That will also play a massive role in how you lift the weight. And of course, you do want a lot of coordination when you're lifting a 1 rep max. You want to make sure your coordination is good, because if your coordination is off, that is usually when an injury will happen. So this is another reason why I like higher frequency type training. And this is why I sell them in my programs, the 2-day split and all this. I do a higher frequency type of training. The reason why is because this does help refine your coordination. And of course, one of the major factors I also talked about that could be limiting when it comes down to strength is your structure. You may find, like I do, because I have a slap tear in my rotator cuff and one of my shoulders sits differently on the bench than the other. So it takes me a long time to find that groove. And I find frequent training really helps offset that a bit, so I can refine my groove to the best of my ability, because my body's not necessarily supporting that groove because the shoulders are sitting slightly different, right? So when you have these small deviations that are structural, there's nothing you can do about it. Rehabilitation doesn't fix these types of things. Just like a broken bone, rehabilitation won't fix a broken bone. So if you notice that you have something like that going on, maybe you have a previous injury, maybe you have a torn something from sometime, maybe torn muscle, torn joint, something like that, you'll find that refining the coordination with lighter weights, but training more often, you may find that you're able to use heavier weights because of that, because your coordination becomes more refined. Because when you have a structural flaw, such as a torn rotator cuff or a torn labrum or something in a hip, or maybe you have an MCL tear or something like that in your knee, what will happen is that the coordination will become a harder or tougher factor to refine, because there's more instability for your body to make up for. And that's something that's really underestimated. Like I used to rep out with 315 on the bench, no problem, for sets over 10 reps. And now I'm at 275 or 295 for around the same. But the reason why is because it's almost like I'm pushing on ice, so I have to compensate for that. So it doesn't mean that you've lost strength. It just means that now there's a greater coordination burden that your body is taking, and that's what's contributing to less strength, supposedly. You're not able to lift the same amount of weight in a direct linear sort of way because your body is sitting slightly off kilter. Well, that was a weird movement.
More weird delt than that.
So to make my point further, when you're doing a compound lift, each muscle, say you take two different guys, and one guy has like the same contractile capacity as another guy. When they're both bench pressing, one guy can coordinate those 3 muscles or 4 muscles or several muscle groups together much better than the other guy. They can basically fire what muscle, find the perfect groove, and basically efficiently move that weight up. And that is what a lot of powerlifters really work on perfecting, to get that groove perfected to make sure they can lift more weight. But if you take that powerlifter outside of that type of exercise and you take him into something that his muscles are kind of dumb at, and you take the other man, this man here, and take him to another exercise, and they both do the same exercise, this guy, the uncoordinated, there might actually be stronger than the powerlifter, just because neither one of them have had a chance to perfect that movement. And powerlifters are really more specialists with exercises. They've found the perfect groove. They're not necessarily stronger, it's just that they've chosen 3 or so lifts where they want to perfect their groove to make sure all the muscles are firing at the right time, so they can take advantage of momentum and everything in order to get that weight up. So bearing this in mind, sometimes a person can have a good 1 rep max, but it's because they practiced the 1 rep max. They practiced wielding that weight. They practiced holding on to that weight. They practiced finding that perfect groove. Because if you lift 315 on the bench or 225 on the bench, you'll notice that your groove will change. Your movement pattern will change. Just like squatting 4 plates or 5 plates or 3 plates, you'll notice that your groove has to change. So there's a certain amount of learning that has to take place that isn't necessarily strength. Sometimes you have the capacity and the muscle to actually move that weight, but you don't necessarily have the coordination down, and that's what's limiting you. So it's not always about just being weaker, okay? So I kind of hate that stronger, weaker sort of thing that's compared a lot of times. People are like, I'm stronger because I lifted this for 1 rep max. Meanwhile, you take them both on the bench press when it comes down to a different weight, and another guy might be able to do way more reps than them. Say you do 5 reps or 6 reps on the bench with something else, and this guy over here can do more reps than this guy that could do a higher 1 rep max. So this is why it doesn't necessarily translate to just more strength, okay? It's coordination as well as structural integrity, the ability of that person's body to be able to take it without tearing something off the bone. You have to kind of understand which type of person you are and what your body constitution is really like. Because if you try to do 1 rep maxes all the time, but you don't have the constitution in the actual tissue itself to take it, you'll just do nothing more than injuring yourself or sideline your progress because you'll tear something or something, right? Now, a third factor is, yeah, the contractile ability of a muscle itself. That's the third factor. That's the third major factor that really constitutes muscular strength, right? So when your muscles are able to contract with a certain power or certain intensity, that will dictate strength in its rawest form. Now, whether you're coordinated enough to translate that to certain movements under balance or under load, that's a different thing. That's when we bring in coordination. That's when we start to bring in coordination into the movement. But the ability of the muscle to be able to contract really hard is the real primordial strength itself. You know, how hard can that muscle contract? Assuming it stays attached to the bones and all this kind of stuff, how hard can it contract? This is really what we're all building in the muscle game called bodybuilding and in powerlifting. We're really building that muscle contraction intensity as well, but some of us have deviated off and become specialists with coordination with certain lifts, and that's what we call powerlifting or Olympic lifting, right? But strength in itself is just the ability of the muscle to be able to contract so hard and to be able to pull the lever arms with as much force as possible. That's bare bones strength. So that goes beyond even coordination, honestly. It's just about the ability of the muscle just to contract. So I hope this helps you understand a little bit more about strength. I hope you can put this in your bag of tricks when it comes to bodybuilding, just something up here to think about. And thanks a lot for watching. If you need to get a hold of me, just go to naturalgallantbodybuilding.com, and thanks a lot to the Patreon supporters, and take care for now. And share my stuff.